Hello, young writers. Thanks for joining us. I'm Amanda from the Stoughton Public Library in Stoughton, Wisconsin, and welcome to week one of our Young Writers Workshop for ages 8 to 11. So, I wanted to host this workshop because I myself started writing when I was 9 years old, so I know this is the perfect age. Also, it's summer. Also, there's a lot going on in the world right now. You might find yourself a little extra time to write some stories. So, I thought this would be a good time to do this. So once a week, I'll post a video. We'll communicate via email and by using the hold shelf and our holds pickup to pass back and forth critiqued work. The directions for how to do that will be in the email. If you are watching this video and you haven't signed yourself or your child up for the program yet, there's still some room. You can email me. The description is going to be on the page for the program listing. So, like I said, I started writing when I was 9 years old. I've been going through my old writing and I found one of the first stories I wrote. It didn't really have a title. I called it Magic Girl. And it said, "Who are you?" the girl asked. I was at a loss for words. I knew who she was, although I had never met her, but I couldn't really remember my name right then. So those are the first few lines of a story that I wrote, probably when I was 10 or 11, I'm guessing. It didn't last very long. It's just this one page, and then I gave up on it, I guess. So as you can see, I've been writing for a long time, and that's one of my first stories. Usually the question people first ask when they say, "How do you write?" It's literally, how do you do it? How do you take an idea and turn it into a story? So writers have a phrase that they like to use. That's the best piece of advice for how to get writing done. And it is called BIC, and it stands for butt in chair. It means you sit down and you write. Gail Carson Levine wrote a great book called Writer to Writer, From Think to Ink. And she has some great advice in that book. One of her rules is the best way to write better is to write more. So if you're waiting for magical inspiration, if you're waiting to get just the right notebook, if you're waiting to be in the right mood, it's probably not going to happen. Just start writing. Just do it. Just see what comes out when you write. Another important piece of advice is don't throw away anything you write. I wanted to start off with that right away because, like I said, I started writing when I was 9, but I don't really have any stories from before I was about 11 or 12. I even wrote a novel when I was 11, a whole novel, and I didn't think it was very good and I threw it away. And many times over the years, I wish that I still had that novel because I'd like to see what I wrote when I was 11 years old. It's pretty amazing. Luckily, I started saving my writing pretty shortly after that, so I do have a lot of my really old writing, but I'll never get back that novel that I wrote when I was 11. Another piece of advice that I recommend for people just starting out writing is to finish your stories. This is something I didn't do when I was young. It took me a long time to start actually finishing my stories and finishing the novels that I wrote, other than the one when I was 11. Because what happens, and this happens to everybody, not just you, this happens to writers now. Who've been writing multiple novels, adults who've been writing novel after novel for years. You're working on your story or your novel, and along comes a wonderful idea. And you think, oh, I just really want to write that new idea. There's even a word for it. They call it a plot bunny because it kind of goes hopping. You're like, oh, what if I wrote that story instead? So the thing is, you haven't had a chance to get to know that story yet. And that story would bring you to just the same place that you are at with the book you're stuck on. You'd get to a point and you'd say, what happens next? Or this just doesn't sound very good to me. Or I'm tired of this story. So the new fresh idea seems really fun. But if you let go of the story you're writing and then chase after the new idea, you're going to get it to the same point with that new idea. And then along comes idea number 3, right? You just want to chase that one instead. So one of the best things you can do for yourself now is, even if you really aren't feeling it with a story, try to make yourself write the beginning, the middle, and the end. Do the whole thing. You will learn so much by making yourself finish the stories that you start. Even if you wind up really not liking it, it's really worth it, I promise. Along the same lines of this is your internal voice. We call it the internal critic that feels like a little person sitting on your shoulder while you're writing. You're writing your story, and the little voice says, "This is a terrible story. Nobody would want to read this. I can't believe you just wrote those words. This is so boring. Who cares?" Things like that. You just have this kind of like negative chatter going on the whole time. Have you ever experienced that as you're writing a story? That, unfortunately, is also another thing that never goes away, even for your favorite writers, even for writers who've written tons of books that you love. It's just part of being a human being, as we're going to doubt ourselves. So just know you're not going to be able to make it go away, but you can choose how much you listen to that voice. Because really, it's not your job while you're writing a story to decide, is it good or is it not good? That's really for readers to decide later on. And honestly, if every writer waited for times when they felt really good about their stories, they felt like they were writing really well and people would love this story, no writing would get done because every writer just really doubts themselves along the way. So you can't shut that voice up, but you can decide how much you listen to it. Some people find it helpful to kind of like let that voice run along for a little bit. And it says, "Your writing is worthless. You're a terrible writer." And you say, "Okay, are you done? I got to get back to work and finish writing this story." So try to get used to not letting your critic run the show when you're writing. Just write your story and don't listen to that critic. Another question that people ask is, how do you turn an idea into a story? Well, like I said, part of it's just sitting down and writing the story. But I think the best way that you can do this is to read books. I'm guessing that you're all readers already. If you like to write, you usually like to read too. But reading good books is one of the best ways to learn about how a story works. You can really think about what's the story that you loved and why did you love it? What made you keep wanting to turn the pages? Did you feel like the characters were real people? Did you think the setting was so magical and inventive and you just wanted to spend time in that world? Did you want to see what happened at the end? What makes you want to keep reading a story? Just remember your job, especially now as a young writer, but all throughout your whole future as a writer, remember that you should enjoy writing. If you lose that love of writing, that's often when things kind of go bad. So try to remember to always just enjoy the process. Don't stress out too much about it. Don't think, I have to write something brilliant and amazing. Just write the stories that you want to write and see what happens. So like I said, we're going to focus on enjoying your writing, but also during this workshop, I'm going to try to give you a lot of hints of how to make your stories better, how to improve them. Like I said, you're not, going to probably rush off and try to publish your book tomorrow. That's something maybe for later on when you're an adult, but it never hurts to keep trying to improve your stories and make them a little bit better, as long as you're still having fun while you do it. Another thing I want to tell you is to not let anybody tell you that your writing now is not important. Like I said, I was 9 when I started writing. I think the writing I did then was just as important to my development as a writer as the writing I did yesterday. You're building on all of it. I've learned a ton from everything I've written in my whole life, and I think it's all very important. So never let anybody say, "Oh, you're just 10, you're just 9, you're just however old you are." Write your stories. Okay, so the last piece of advice I wanted to give for today, before I talk about the logistics of how this is going to work, how we're going to pass writing back and forth and critique it. But before that, I wanted to talk about conflict in story, problems, right? That's another thing. If you're thinking, I'm writing this story and I think it's interesting, but I don't really know what happens. So I can tell you one of the important ingredients for all stories is conflict. or a problem, right? If everything just moves really smoothly, nobody has any problems, the writing might be really fun, but do you really want to keep turning the page? So I pulled a few examples from some recent books that came out, and I wanted to talk about conflict in those plot descriptions. So the first one is called Nikki Tesla and the Ferret Proof Death Ray. The plot description goes like this. Nikki Tesla is a genius. So mostly she finds school boring and amuses herself by inventing things, like her mysterious missing father. Trouble is, most of her inventions have serious lethal potential, like the death ray that just blew a hole in the floor. So she and her ferret are hustled off to the Special Genius Academy with classmates who are equally exceptional, although she still worries about fitting in. But when her death ray disappears, she has something bigger to worry about. Who took it, and what are they planning to do? So if this is the kind of story that you like, you might have heard this plot summary and thought, I really want to hear more about this character. I want to see what happens next. Who did steal her death ray? And what are they going to do with a death ray? So imagine this was a story, and I said, oh, here's this story about Nikki Tesla. Nikki Tesla is a genius who amuses herself by inventing things. And that's it. Right? There's not much of a story there. It might be an interesting character, but what makes the story more interesting is the conflict, the problems that she has. She's sent to this special school, but everybody there is just as smart as she is, and she's worried about fitting in. And then on top of it all, somebody steals her death ray, right? Those are some interesting problems, some conflicts going on. Another one is called Music for Tigers by Michelle Kaderosman. So here's the plot for that one. Middle schooler Louisa wants to spend the summer practicing violin for a place in the youth symphony, but instead is sent to the Tasmanian rainforest camp of her Australian relatives. There, she learns that her family secretly protects the last of the supposedly extinct Tasmanian tigers. When an encroaching mining operation threatens the hidden sanctuary, Louisa realizes her music can help. I thought that was a really interesting plot description of one of our newer books that we have. So you heard some conflict there, right? So imagine this was the plot. Middle schooler Louisa spends the summer practicing violin for a place in the youth symphony. That might be a good story. It might be interesting. You could even said instead she's sent to her family's secret tiger protection camp. That's interesting too, right? But if that's all that I tell you, okay. So there's a little conflict there. At first, Louisa thinks, this is not what I want to do with my summer. She says, I don't want to go spend the summer with my relatives. I want to practice and get into the youth symphony. So there's a little conflict there, right? That seems like a problem for her. She's not getting to do what she wants. But then she discovers they're secretly protecting tigers, which is really fascinating, right? That seems like a pretty good trade if you were having to give up on music camp and then you were going to protect tigers instead. And then, of course, the big conflict at the end that the tigers are actually in danger because there are miners that are threatening the tiger habitat. And Louisa, this is what I wonder, how does her music help? Did you wonder that when I was reading that? How can somebody playing music help protect tigers? I mean, that's the title of the story, right? Music for Tigers. Does it make you want to read the story to see what happens and how this all works out? So think about that as you're writing your own stories. If you're stuck, think, what's a roadblock I can throw in front of my character? What's a way I can really mess up her day, change her plans, give her something she has to overcome? So think of a way to give your character some problems. That's what really will drive your story. All right, well, I'm going to email the link to this video to your families. And in the email, I'll talk about how to pass writing back and forth. Also, keep something in mind at the very end of this writing workshop. We're going to make a digital literary magazine that'll share some of your writing. It can have stories, poetry, articles, photographs, drawings, anything that you want to share. So, over the next month, be thinking about the writing that you'd like to share. And toward the end, I might say, hey, would you like to share this particular thing that we read or worked on together? So, just something to keep in mind that at the end of this, we're going to have a literary magazine. And parents, just so you know, the magazine will just have first name and last initial, so it won't have anybody's full name in it. It'll be on our website for people to read. All right. Happy writing, everyone.